O Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. Woe to you who desire the day of the Lord. Why would you have the day of the Lord? It is a day of darkness and not of light. As if a man ran from a lion and met a bear, or ran into the house to lean against the wall and a serpent bit him. So cries out Amos from last week's Old Testament lesson, Amos chapter 5, at the end, or at the beginning of it, verse 18 and following. And that hair-raising cry continues in the Old Testament lesson for this week. The word of the prophet, Zephaniah, in verse 14 and following, at the end, when he says, the day of the Lord is near, near and hastening fast. The sound of that day is bitterness. A mighty man cries aloud there. It is a day of wrath, a day of anguish and distress, a day of ruin and destruction, a day of gloom and darkness, a day of clouds and thick darkness, a day of the sound of the trumpet and of the battle cry against the fortified cities and all the embattlements. I avoided it last week by preaching on the gospel. Fueled for eternity, that was our message last week. And even though there's a lot of interesting things in the parable in our gospel this week, from Matthew chapter 25, I can't avoid this voice of the prophets anymore. If the day of the Lord is that day of wrath, and it's that day of destruction, and it is coming and drawing near and hastening fast, as Zephaniah says, then we got to deal with it. Because if that day is coming, we need some protection for that day. And why is that called the day of the Lord? Anyway, I thought this was the day of the Lord, Sunday, a day to gather and sing hymns and celebrate together and give thanks to God. Isn't this the day of the Lord? What is this day of destruction? Except Zephaniah tells us it's the day when the Lord is finally going to put to silence the foolish talk of people who speak out of their complacency and say things like Zephaniah 1 verse 12, the Lord will not do good, nor will he do ill. In other words, who don't believe either there is a God who will step in and intervene in this world, or that God is not powerful enough to do it, or he's not willing to do it, but he will not do anything about the injustice or the violence or anything else taking place. The Lord will not do it. Well, he is going to come and do it. Zephaniah tells us, look out, the day of the Lord is hastening fast. The day when he will come as judge, and he will judge all evil and violence, and not only evil and violence, but all those who are hypocritical and those who are complacent too. That day is coming, and it's drawing near, it's coming fast. I can't avoid it. I can't help it. We have to mention it. Although I'm not going to preach on it today either. and not because I'm not gutsy enough to do so, and not because I'm avoiding the words of the prophets from the Old Testament, like Amos or Zephaniah, but because we need more than just to be frightened of that day when it comes. And what we need to prepare us for that day is to be well suited for that day when it comes. For those of you who worshiped here for a number of years, maybe a decade or so, you might remember the Jones family that was with us for a long time here at Holy Cross. They've now moved to another part of the country. But when they were here with us, Chas Jones had been serving in the military, and he spent almost a year deployed over in Iraq, and it was during some of the fierce fighting that took place over there. And so he loaned us for a Sunday his IBA, his interceptor body armor. And it was right over here. We put it on display here in the sanctuary for everybody to see that Sunday. And it was the full body armor that protected him from the chin above his neck, all the way down past his groin, and wrapped around all his vital organs, and also his glasses and his Kevlar helmet, and even the ceramic plates that went inside the pockets on the breastplate. He had all that, and he described to us how that would protect him from a .50 caliber round that was shot at him. But even so, with the ceramic plates that went in the body armor, he said when those were put in there, it would protect him from multiple rounds, blows from multiple rounds from an AK-47 assault rifle shot at close range. That Sunday happened to be the Sunday that we had Ephesians chapter 6 as the epistle reading assigned for that day. And so it was very fitting to have that armor up here, and everybody could see it, touch it, and talk to Chas about it. And he described it and explained it, because it was very helpful in describing what Paul was talking about in Ephesians chapter 6. In that text, he's talking about the armor of God and how we're fitted with a breastplate of righteousness. that comes from God, that is placed over us. And we have a shield of faith that blocks any of the flaming darts that might be shot at us. And we have feet fitted with the readiness of the gospel. And we have the belt of truth around our waist holding it all together. And we have the helmet of salvation. And we have in our hand the sword of the Spirit. And Paul talks about these things because we have a formidable enemy out there, the devil, who is always after us, firing multiple rounds, often at close range, and firing darts. And what's worst is not just the firepower that he has, but is that he's not backed up by just manpower either. Because Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, Paul says, our fight is not with flesh and blood, but with the rulers and the authorities, with the powers, the cosmic powers over this present darkness and the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. And Paul says in Ephesians 6 that with this armor, we can withstand anything that the devil would come at us with. And yet, the problem with the day of the Lord, that Zephaniah describes, that Amos describes, this day of distress, this day of trumpet call and battle cry against the fortified cities and all the embattlements, is that the battle is not being waged by the devil. And it's not the spiritual forces of evil who are coming against us. And it's not the cosmic powers of this present darkness. But the battle is being waged by the Lord himself. In our epistle lesson for today, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 3, Paul says, while they are saying peace and security, sudden destruction will fall upon them like a woman in labor pains, and they will not escape. And there Paul seems to be echoing what was said in the Old Testament prophets by Amos, by Zephaniah. But there's also more in that text from 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. More for us today that actually helps us be ready and well-suited for when that day comes. And so we're going to spend time in that text. If you want to open it up, I encourage you to do that. You'll find it in your service folder today, and you can follow along. We're going to spend time in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. Not only does Paul say in that text that that day of the Lord is going to come suddenly upon people, he also encourages us in verse 8. And he says, but since we belong to the day. What day? Verse 8. Since we belong to the day of the Lord. That's the day we belong to. Since we belong to the day, let us be sober, having put on faith and hope as the breastplate. Faith and love as the breastplate, and the hope of salvation as a helmet. For God has not destined us for wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who gave his life for us, so that whether we are asleep or awake, we might live with him. Therefore, encourage one another with these words, and build one another up, just as you are doing. That's verses 8 through 11. Do you notice the difference in the armor there? That's being mentioned here in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 from Ephesians chapter 6. It's not the breastplate of righteousness that we have on that protects us from those fiery rounds that the devil would send against us, the righteousness of Christ. But here instead, he says the breastplate is a breastplate of faith and of love. It's faith in our Lord Jesus Christ and what he's done for us, that he has come and given his life on the cross for us so that we would belong to him, and we belong to that day. That day is our day, and we have faith in that. And the love, the faith and love that makes up that breastplate, the love is not our love for one another, it's our love for God. It's God's love for us that sent Jesus down here to do this for us. And because he has done this, we are his children. We are children of the light. We belong to that day. And whether we're alive or asleep on the day when he's come, whether we've passed away or not, we belong to that day, and we will be with him. He has not destined us for wrath. So we have hope about that day that we wear. We wear that hope of our salvation like a helmet, and we wear it every day. I've never in my life been in a situation where I needed to wear body armor. I was never in the military. I've never served in a wartime situation like Chas did and had to wear those. He told us that he had to wear that body armor all day, every day. Even if they were having a meeting inside, the fighting was so severe in the area where he was, they wore their body armor even in their meetings when they were inside. I've never been in that kind of situation. But I did work at Sigma Aldrich Chemical Company. And when I worked there, I was issued one of these. I worked there for about 10 years of my lifespan, whether it's employee or a contractor with them. And this was something that every employee and every contractor and every vendor that went into their plants had to wear. And when I first was assigned this and told I had to wear this, I thought it was kind of silly, because I thought, what are the chances that working here, somebody's really going to drop something heavy on my head? I mean, really, is that going to... I was the kid who did not wear a bike helmet. I didn't even own one when I was growing up. And when I went to the batting cages, I just scoffed at the row of batting helmets that they had hanging there, like I really need that. And I just went into the cages and didn't bother wearing one. But I had to wear this. It was required. It was company safety policy that everybody had to wear their hard hat. And so I wore it, and I found out pretty quickly that I was not wearing this because of what somebody else might do. Because I can't tell you how many times while I was wearing this that I bent over to pick up a fitting or a hose or look at numbers on a scale or look inside a reactor to see a reaction that was going on and hit my head on a pipe or a piece of bracing for a fixed piece of equipment or on the bottom of a chemical reactor, and so hard that it about knocked me over. And then when I would stand there and try to wait for the dizziness and the stars to disappear, I would thank God that I had this on my head. Because I realized this was not really about what other people would drop on my head. This was to protect me from my own stupidity. And there were some times when I would hit the same dumb pipe over and over again, repeated times in the same week, until finally, by experience of failure, I learned to avoid it. See, this is the difference between 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 armor and Ephesians chapter 6 verse armor. Ephesians chapter 6 armor is armor that's to protect us from outside, from the devil and what he might throw at us. The 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 armor is armor that protects us from ourselves, our own stupidity, because sin is hanging out there, just in low-hanging danger all around us, and we Christians just keep walking into it, don't we? It happens all the time. You ever had one of those days where you're in a good mood and you're having great conversations with people, enjoying the day, and then something happens and all of a sudden you are just in the worst mood and you're barking at people and things are starting to fly out of your mouth and you're getting angry, and then you're thinking to yourself, what in the world just happened? I thought this was a good day. And sometimes, whatever that sin is, we walk into it repeatedly over and over again until we learn by the Spirit of God or by the experience of failure to begin to avoid it. It's that sin that's in our life, and because of it, without this kind of a helmet, like if I didn't have this helmet for all those years at the chemical company, I would be in a sorry state standing up here before you today. Probably couldn't string a coherent sentence together. But with it, I'm protected. And the same thing for us. God gives us this helmet of the hope of salvation, and it protects us. Because without it, the way we walk into sin, we'd be a sorry state up here today. Because that's why the day of the Lord is coming. And it's only a day of wrath for those who have that sin in their lives. This is the day when the Lord's going to come and he's going to do away with all evil and all violence and all injustice and all complacency and even do away with death itself. And it's all those who are marked by sin and evil who are going to experience that and experience his wrath. But the problem is we say, well, it's kind of all of us. If we dial back Ephesians, we were looking at Ephesians chapter 6 with the armor of God, but dial that back to Ephesians chapter 2, verse 1. Paul says, as for you, you were dead in your trespasses and sins. And he doesn't give any exceptions. There's no caveats to that. It's everybody is dead in their trespasses and sins. It's like what Paul says in Romans chapter 3, verse 10. He likes to quote the Old Testament for this. And so he goes back to the psalmist who said, there is no one righteous, not even one. Colossians chapter 3, Paul gives us a string of those dangers that we who like to be righteous walk right into all the time. It's all that low-hanging dangers that are all around us. And he says there's things like immorality. And by that he means our culture's skewed sense of sexuality and how it should be used. And we walk into that all the time and just kind of get lulled into accepting that and believing it. Or he says it's passions. And by that he's not just talking about sexual passions, but he's talking about our drive for things that we want and desire. And it's when that doesn't match up with the things God desires. But isn't that what our culture is encouraging us to do all the time? Well, follow your desires, follow your heart. Well, wait a minute, does that match up with the Lord's desires and the Lord's ways? Or Paul says, here's a specific one of those, covetousness. It's another one we walk into all the time. That is the sense that we're discontent with the things we have, and we really like what we see that other people have that we don't have. The scriptures call that covetousness. But isn't that the basis of every advertisement on TV or anywhere? It's making us want things that we don't have that other people have, and we get all right into it. Why is it that we blow our budgets and spend more than we want to spend? It's for these kinds of things. And anger, we've already mentioned that one. Paul says that's another one there as he's listing this string. And why is that an issue? Because it's just an emotion. I can't necessarily control it. I get angry, but we can't control what we do with it. And so the next one on the list of those dangers, Paul puts as slander. Slander is what we often like to do in our anger. We get angry with somebody, we just like to spout off about them and tell somebody else what we're angry about. And yet Paul says that's slander. And I could keep going on the list. This is Colossians chapter 3, verses 5 through 8. There's lots more in that list, but the reason I even bring up that list is because right in the middle of that list, Colossians chapter 3, verses 5 to 8 is verse 6, where Paul says, on account of these, the wrath of God is coming. Wait a minute. I thought the wrath of God was coming because people are walking into churches and killing people. I thought the wrath of God was coming because there's wars in different places in the world. I thought the wrath of God was coming because of injustice and violence and all sorts of huge things are happening. Paul says because of these. And the wrath of God is coming. The wrath of God is coming for all those large things going on in our world. But the wrath of God is also coming for those small and simple sins. And you and I as believers walk into all the time. And what would it be like if we walked into those and we didn't have on his faith and his love and his helmet of salvation? Well, we'd be bumbling around in the darkness is what it'd be like. And that's where Paul goes in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 4, he says, but you are not in the darkness, for that day to surprise you like a thief, for you are all children of the light, children of the day. You are not in the night. You are not in the darkness. And so do not sleep as others do, but be sober. For those who sleep, sleep at night. And those who get drunk at night. And what Paul's talking about there, he's talking about sort of drinking and getting drunk and not being sober. All he knows is alcohol, so that's what he's saying. But add to that the whole list of all sorts of other things that people try to comfort themselves with in the times of disparity and struggle and pain and difficulty in our life. Whether it's alcohol or it's prescription pain medications that we overdose on or take that we shouldn't be taking, or it's things that have been legalized in our state like marijuana, or add to that a whole host of other mind-altering kind of drugs. Paul says, you don't need that. For those who are of the night, get drunk at the night, but be sober. Because you belong to the day, to that day. And having put on the breastplate, faith and love, and for a helmet, the hope of salvation. Because you are not destined for wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. So that's what we wear every day. This summer, our family went back to the Midwest to visit my wife's family and visit my family. When we were back there, I got a chance to go fishing with my father, which we like to do. My daughters and my niece and my mother all went to the amusement park just outside of St. Louis. It's a place called Six Flags, and they were going to ride roller coasters and stuff, and we dropped them off there. So it was out of town a little ways, and near there was a little conservation area on the Merrimack River, and so my father and I, after dropping them off, just went over there to drop a line in the water. We were just going to have a nice, peaceful, relaxing day on the riverbank, and it was. It was serene. It was peaceful. It was hot. It was like 97 degrees and humid that day, but that's Missouri in the summertime. But we just had a good time. Hardly saw any other people while we were there. We were sitting on the bank. There were a couple other fishermen that came and used the boat launch and put their boats in that day. And then we saw a conservation agent come walking up the bank. A conservation agent is like Washington's wildlife agents. It's sort of like a park ranger kind of thing, works for the state. And she was there to check fishing licenses. And she came walking up the bank, and she stopped where we were and asked for our fishing licenses. And we showed her, and she was very nice, and she was very cordial. And we got to talking about other things too. And it's been a long time since I've had a Missouri state official check my fishing license. That's happened before when I was young living in Missouri, but it's been a long time. I remember in the past they used to have a set of handcuffs on their belt and a radio on their belt, and even a sidearm there just in case something was going on. But this time, what surprised me was, in this hot day, 97 degrees, middle of summer, we're all sweating like crazy. Underneath her uniform shirt, she had full body armor, akin to what Jess Jones brought in here from his days serving in wartime in Iraq. And that's what she's wearing under her shirt. This is not she didn't get sent out that day to go break up a drug bust. And she wasn't like off doing some deal in the middle of the night trying to catch a thief or some violent criminal or some crime that was going on. She wasn't dealing with wartime situations or seasons. She was dealing with fishing season. She was dealing with fishing licenses. That's all she was doing. And so her wearing this was because this is a part of her everyday wear. That's what she wore every day to work. She prepared every day as if she were going to run into a thief in the night. And that's what you and I do too. That's why we have the breastplate of faith and love and the helmet of the hope of salvation. And it's why we wear that every day, not just when we're in the church, but we wear it everywhere and all the time. And that's why we don't need to worry about the times or the seasons. That's where Paul starts out this text. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 1. He says, I don't need to write to you about the times or the seasons. You have no need to know about those things. Because you know the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. We don't need to be watching the news and trying to figure out, okay, when is the Lord coming this year? When is that going to be? And that's why you don't find me preaching about that a lot. Like, oh, this is this prophecy being fulfilled by Zephaniah, and this is this. And because it's going to come like a thief in the night. What God wants us to do is be ready for that day. We don't need to preach on those things because we are children of the light. And it's not going to surprise us like a thief because we're well prepared. We have faith and love as a breastplate. And we have the hope of salvation as a helmet given to us in Jesus. In his name.